Welcome to a segment that we are calling License to Legacy, where we take a look at special anniversaries in the James Bond franchise, be it literary or cinematic or anything we see fit for. Joining me today are Bill Koenig.
Hello, how's it going?
David Leigh.
Hello.
And Eoghan Lyng.
The pleasure, I'm sure, is yours.
So, Eoghan, when did you first see License to Kill?
That's a very good question. I'm going to guess that I'm the youngest person here. So I was born after License to Kill premiered. I was born in 1993 in Ireland. And I didn't get to see it till I was about 15. I saw it one wet weekend in Ennis in County Clare on video. There was also the weekend I discovered Led Zeppelin. So one of the best weekends of my life. I mean, at that point, I was fairly fed up with the Bond series, but I liked the books, and this felt like it was Fleming distilled. That said, I have seen it on the big screen since. I'd like to take this as a moment to remember my pal John Lennon, who very kindly organized a screening at UCD. This was earlier in the year. He showed us, he was the head of James Bond Ireland, and we watched License to Kill on the big screen, and afterwards a bunch of us had a chat, and he and I had a chat about the Godfather movies, and he made a very good point. He said the first one's like a crime drama, the second one's opera, and no truer words were ever said. So John Lennon, you're a legend wherever you are, and I'm going to have a drink in your name.
He is definitely a member in the Bond community that is missed by a lot of people. He was very kind by all accounts.
He was marvelous.
And I should probably mention that this episode, we're looking at the 35th anniversary of License to Kill. So, Bill, when was the first time that you saw License to Kill?
I saw License to Kill on July 14th, 1989, which was its release date in the U.S. And I saw it at the first showing that was available at the theater, which was about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. I had taken the day off, so I could see it and not have to worry about work things. And then a kind of side note, when I got home, I turned on the TV, was switching around, and on the Nickelodeon channel here in the US, which is aimed at kids, they had a special about License to Kill. And they had sent 3 kid interviewers to interview the cast. And, you could tell by the video, they must have done it while they were filming in Key West. And I'll tell an anecdote about that later. But so I had a double dose of License to Kill on its very first day in the U.S. And the second being totally unexpected. I just stumbled across it.
Now, while it did premiere in the UK in London on June 13th of 1989, it seems that the general release date was July 14th for most of the world, putting it clear of other movies like Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade and Batman, which on June 23rd just blew the doors off of theaters with the response. David, when did you first catch License to Kill? Was it on the big screen or did you wait?
That is a very interesting question because I don't even know the year. I can't even, I'm not going to be very specific about the date at all. I didn't see it on the big screen. I had a bit of a rocky relationship with 80s Bond, and I think at the end of Roger Moore's period as Bond, I wasn't really sure if I was a cinematic Bond fan anymore, because I enjoyed some of the films, but by the time of Octopussy and A View to a Kill, I wasn't up for it at all. It wasn't the start of Bond film I wanted, because I'd always been more a fan of literary Bond, and I was an avid reader as a kid, and so that was the James Bond I wanted. And so from that point of view, Sean Connery was my Bond. When Timothy Dalton came on board, and I did go and see I did go and see The Living Daylights on the big screen, but I'm not sure what it was. But with License to Kill, I didn't go. And I remember going to see Batman, and I remember going to see the Indiana Jones film, and God knows what else that summer. But I didn't see Bond, which, if I look back at it, I can hardly believe was me. But so I'm not really sure what was going on then. So I got it on video at home at some point, or on TV. I'm not sure.
Yeah, mine was a little complicated as well. I was 12 this summer that this movie came out, so going to the movies wasn't really up to me. It was always up to my parents' whims, and I didn't see Indiana Jones. We did see Batman several times that summer, and that may have had something to do with why we didn't see License to Kill in cinema, because I'm the oldest of 5 kids. So anytime, trying to get 7 people to the movies, even back then, was an expensive proposition. So we usually waited till it was at the dollar theater. After it had been out for a few months, then it would go to this one theater and tickets were $1 each. So I don't know if the rating had anything to do with it, because my parents did take me to see Octopussy and A View to a Kill and The Living Daylights at the cinema. But I want to say my mom, for some reason, balked at the first Bond that was PG-13, but didn't for Batman, which was the same rating. But I didn't see License to Kill until a few years later, when it was on broadcast television, and it was the Fox affiliate channel, which never had good reception. It was always kind of soft and snowy, which I feel like it impacted my viewing of the film until I got it on VHS and then seeing it properly on Laserdisc in the correct aspect ratio. Bill, how often do you rewatch this movie?
Every so often, kind of thing. I was just going to say, to reinforce what you said about that Fox showing, it was on the Fox network. That's where License to Kill debuted on television. And I tuned in, and it was hacked up. It was.
Oh, I'm sure it had to have been.
Oh, yeah. So for you, seeing it for the first time there, that was not the optimum thing. Because, again, I had seen it in the theater. But I couldn't believe how. I mean, yes, TV showings, they're often hacked, but that was License to Kill was especially hacked up on that first showing on Fox.
And how often do you rewatch the movie?
It's a film of annual pilgrimage for me, if not biannual, or as in I watch it 2 or 3 times a year. I haven't seen it since the UCD screening, but I watched it twice before the UCD screening. So I've seen it 3 times in 2024, and I intend to watch it a further 3 times later on this year, because I think it is the truest distillation of Fleming that there is. It was the case of an actor returning to the source material, bring contradiction to a series that had become pastiche.
It's always nice when you have a Bond guest star show up on your podcast and leave his commentary as well.
Yes, Timothy Dalton is my favorite Bond, and License is my favorite Bond film. I don't think it's the best Bond film. Obviously, Majesties or Goldfinger are worthier of that title, but it's my favorite. I think it's the greatest distillation of the aesthetic and the feel of Fleming.
It's a very good point, and it's funny too how sometimes our favorite isn't necessarily the best. But when you have 25 movies to choose from, it's hard to rank them when you get that many, I feel like. And favorites aren't necessarily always the best one. A lot of times it's,
exactly.
Depends on, how you saw it and if it was your first movie. Like I enjoy Octopussy a lot. That's the first one that I saw on the big screen, but that doesn't make it even close to what my favorite or what I think the best is. But it does have a special place in my heart because of that fact.
When I interviewed Robert Davi, I told him that License is my favorite. He says, I wish everybody would say that.
David, I get the feeling that this isn't one you revisit that often.
It isn't. Yeah, I find it. I find it fairly difficult to watch. There's something about it that really doesn't do it for me, and I acknowledge that there's a ton of Fleming in it, but in a way, part of it may be that it doesn't look like a Bond film in some respects. With I think the clothing's rather dated for one, but it's not just that, because there are there are clearly during the Roger Moore era. There are very, very dated clothes. I mean, he wears horrendous flares in some of them, and the safari suit only has a certain place and time that you're really able to get away with it, and it isn't just that, but it I don't know. It may be that it borrows a bit too much from other films that were going on around it. I can't really put my finger on it. The only thing that I do know is it doesn't click for me.
Well, and we know that it ranks towards the top for you. So, David, where would it fall in your ranking of the Eoghan films?
It really is. It's towards the bottom. It would be.
Wow.
I don't know if it's. No, it's not the absolute bottom of the list, because that goes to A View to a Kill, I think. But
what a charming fellow.
But it's far from one of my favorites. Yeah.
Bill, how about you?
I basically avoid doing detailed rankings because usually, like, my top ones stay pretty steady, the bottom ones stay pretty steady, but in the vast middle, they go up and down, and sometimes it depends on my mood. I just I see YouTube videos where they this is the definitive ranking. I'm like, no, and
yeah.
And I like them all in varying degrees. And I just,
I'm with you there, Bill, completely, because I've been asked in the past to actually rank the Bond films, but I don't want to do that because I can't, because there are some that I rank higher than others, and that will always be the case. But very often it comes down to what kind of mood I'm in. Sometimes
very much.
Sometimes I say, all right, I'm going to watch a Bond film tonight, and I think I'm going to watch say Thunderball, which is one of my favorite Bond films. And then I sit down and I think, no, that's not the style of Bond film I want to watch. I want to watch The Man with the Golden Gun. And so I don't consider The Man with the Golden Gun better than Thunderball by any means, but and I don't consider Thunderball better than From Russia with Love, but I prefer it usually to From Russia with Love.
I can say something controversial. I think License to Kill is better than From Russia with Love. It's much better. I think it's the best of the sophomore films.
I don't know if I want to disagree with that or not. For me, From Russia with Love, it's always it's a great movie. It's extremely well paced. I just want to get to Bond, and like the novel, there's so much non-Bond before you get to the main character, and I just want to jump right in. That's usually my biggest complaint about that movie. In terms of License to Kill, though, I don't rewatch it all that often. It's not my go-to Dalton film. It's usually The Living Daylights. I think a lot of that has to do with the score and the locations. And it's been a minute since I've watched it. I've been holding off, trying to cleanse my palate of License to Kill for a little bit because it is a 35th anniversary. The Alamo Drafthouse movie chain has been showing movies from 1989 all summer, and they have a screening coming up. So I've been trying to save myself for that to get a more of a fresh take on it and, find something new. But in terms of where I would put it, for me, it's kind of in the middle. And I think a lot of it is because of how I saw it. Not necessarily the quality, because as we've already said, there's a lot of good Fleming elements that I really appreciate seeing in it. But it's not necessarily like comfort food Bond for me, like Tomorrow Never Dies or Goldfinger or Thunderball. So that's where I fall on it. It's kind of somewhere in the middle, maybe in the higher end of the middle, but somewhere in the middle. Timothy Dalton has been quoted as saying, one who was often very frightened, nervous, and tense. So based on that, was Dalton ahead of his time with his portrayal and view of the character? What do you think, Bill?
Well, I will say this. Timothy Dalton provided a very earnest, very sincere portrayal of James Bond. Allegedly, Connery read a few of the novels. I'm thinking it was maybe one or two or maybe three at the most. I don't know how many Dalton read, but clearly he had read plenty. And so I think his comment that you just quoted is spot on. And it was he ahead of his time? Yeah, maybe. Because in reality, you have literary Bond and you have cinema Bond. And they have similarities, but they are different. Dalton was doing his best to drag everybody to as close to the literary Bond as he could. I'll leave it at that.
Owen, what do you think?
I think he's such a singular presence that I don't know if he was ahead of his time or behind the times. I think he's just so distinct and he's just so marvelous. He's just Charles Helfenstein did something very clever on the cover of The Making of the Living Daylights. He put a picture of Dalton on top of a book. So it's fresh from the pages of Fleming. That's a very clever metatextual joke. People say he's Robert Davi says he's the father of Daniel Craig. I'm not sure. I think Dalton's much closer to the books. I think the only other person who was close to the books was Lazenby, although I think that was more Peter Hunt's influence than Lazenby influence. I think Dalton was the only actor who said, right, tomorrow morning I'm going back to the books. I will read Hildebrand Rarity for breakfast, Live and Let Die for lunch, and before supper time it will be The Spy Who Loved Me, which will get me in the appetite for the lady this evening.
David, what did you think of Dalton's portrayal and how he viewed the character of Bond?
Well, as a literary Bond fan, I really loved The Living Daylights because it was the first time that we really had seen some of what was going on in Bond's head, I think. So I as Bond, I really liked him. Even though I don't like License to Kill particularly much, him as a Bond, yes.
Yeah, I think that Dalton, there's just something very commanding about his presence as Bond. There's a very direct method as the character, like certainly in contrast with Roger Moore. There's just I don't want to say blunt, but he has a presence it feels right, and yeah, like to what Bill's point, there definitely was at that time a vast divide between cinema and literary Bond, and I feel like Dalton, like you guys have said, he was trying to bring that back, the literary side of it, and I don't think that's necessarily where people were, what they were invested in at the time, looking for a more fantastical aspect of it. Staying in that vein, how did being more like dressed down as Bond and showing injuries affect how the character was viewed, David?
Yeah, how did it affect how he was viewed?
You mentioned you didn't like his suiting.
Yes, I think the clothing, a lot of the clothing is very dated. How that specifically affects my view of the film, I don't really know. I think, in The Living Daylights, he gets away with it more than for me than in License to Kill. Although, I think there's also this thing that by the late 1980s, men weren't wearing suits half as often as they were in, or even probably 10% of what they were in the 1950s when Bond was first written, in the 1960s when the films first came out. So I think it's a bit unrealistic to keep Bond in a suit, and I think that's going to continue that's going to continue as long as they are making Bond films. But we're going to see less suits. But to answer your question directly, I don't really know.
Okay.
Yeah, if I could add something, one of the differences between Roger Moore Bond and Timothy Dalton Bond, in Octopussy, Roger Moore Bond has managed to bring like a half dozen different suits with him to India, which was funny because in the preceding scene, he's telling him, I have just 55 minutes to catch that flight. And it's like, he's saying this in the middle of London, like, if you got to the airport with 55 minutes to go, you'd probably miss your flight, but that's modern stuff. Whereupon in License to Kill, Timothy Dalton Bond is getting ready to move out, and he's traveling rather light, which when you stop think about it, he's an agent. He should be traveling light. He shouldn't be like having 6, 7 suits, whatever it was. And then he finds out something happened to Leiter, and the plot follows. But yeah, just that little detail just shows you how different the sensibilities were between the two Bond actors.
Oh, and what did you think of like him being a little more bloody than we'd seen in the past and more casual in his dress?
I think the violence adds something to it. The exploding head is a little OTT. It's filmed in a way that's something from a David Cronenberg film. Yeah, that is a criticism of mine of the film. But the punchline of "none to it," that's a hysterical punchline. That gets a big laugh whenever it's shown. I think the books are very violent. Live and Let Die is a very violent book. I think License to Kill is truer to the novel of Live and Let Die than Live and Let Die was. I mean, we get the sharks, we get the excitement, we get the terrible joke on Felix Leiter. And as for the dressing down, I think I agree with David. Like, it was a different time. I mean, you see that wonderful Terry Wogan interview from 1989, and like you've got Terry, and there's Terry Wogan all dressed up in his nice suit, because he's of that generation of radio presenters. You look perfect for the part. You are perfect for the part. But you turned it down twice. And he's of that generation that wore a suit to work, whereas Dalton is the new guard. He just comes in sporting it casual. He's got his rose on his lapel. Well, I was offered twice. It's not the same thing, Terry. Well, I said that he was a blunt instrument beset by moral confusion. He's got... going with the moral confusion, and someone with moral confusion isn't necessarily dressing themselves up to the nines. So again, it's a return to the literary Bond, the Bond who despises laces, isn't particularly comfortable in a lot of his suits, but has to do it because he's on Her Majesty's Secret Service.
I think with this film in particular, like, you really do feel the violence and the violence that is inflicted upon Bond. Like, when we get to the end, after Bond has defeated Sanchez and he's just exhausted, his hair's disheveled, he's bleeding. Like, I can't think of a Roger Moore movie where he looked that tired and spent and injured. So it definitely, it changed something, I think, in the way we perceive the character. And while we were having this conversation right now, it reminded me of the Vin Diesel movie Triple X. I only saw it once. It was like there was this big lead up to Die Another Day in cinema, where there was all these spy movies coming out before Die Another Day did, with like the third Austin Powers, and was there a Mission Impossible that year? But there was like Jackie Chan in the tuxedo, and the first Bourne Identity movie, and this Triple X. And the opening of the movie, from my recollection, was at a rave, and there's one guy there in a tuxedo. Like, everyone else is dressed all hip and cool and early 2000s, and he gets murdered because he's the one person there in a tuxedo. So clearly he's the spy, and he gets outed right away for standing out. And I feel like they were trying to take shots at Bond in that scene by saying he was outdated and not hip anymore. And Timothy Dalton in this movie, like, he's not that Bond. Like, he wears the tuxedo when it's appropriate at the casino, but otherwise he's just kind of going around Florida, and he doesn't necessarily always wear a tux or a suit, because that's not that kind of movie. And that's not, while Roger Moore had like his casual outfits, they were a little snappier than how we see Dalton in this movie. Which I thought was was interesting, and maybe people at the time didn't see that as James Bond, because I think now with Daniel Craig, where we get that mixture of Tom Ford suits and more, Sunspell t-shirts, it's more accepted, I think. So with that in mind, what doors did Dalton's portrayal open for his successors, Owen? How did his take benefit like Brosnan and Craig?
Well, he brought an emotional vulnerability to it that I think we'd only ever really seen in Majesty's Secret Service. Lazenby's a fine Bond, but he's not in Dalton's league as an actor. There's that great article by the Guardian where they said there are three men who should not have been James Bond. One is George Lazenby because he's not an actor. The second is Timothy Dalton because he's too good an actor. It's a very zingy introduction. Yeah, he brought that emotional fragility to it. He brings the grief when he talks about his dead wife. No. It's time I left. Which, then Brosnan mirrored in the scene where he finds Terry Hatcher's body, and of course Craig brought into it in Quantum of Solace. There's this heaviness that we didn't see in Roger Moore's Bond of Sean Connery. And in, say, Living Daylights, when Dalton says, why me? When he's asked if he's the greatest agent, you would never have had that with Connery or Moore, because they were the kind of men who thought they were the coolest men in the world. I mean, Connery would never have said, why me? Well, I know I'm very sexy, but why me?
Well, if I could push back just a little on that, Connery did have moments, but they were much more in passing. They were much briefer. Think when Tilly is killed in Goldfinger. Think when Paula is committed suicide in Thunderball. Think when the Japanese agent has been killed as a result of an attempt on Bond's life. So there's some of that, but again, it's much more quickly done, and whereupon with Dalton and then later Craig, they have more of it.
David, any thoughts?
Well, I think it's clear that Dalton's portrayal of Bond opened doors for Daniel Craig.
I think he did. Like, he broke the ice for audiences accepting some of Bond's humanity, but I think like Brosnan deserves a lot of that credit too, because he was always trying to push for more of that emotional aspect, and it wasn't really something that was granted to him. But I don't think he could have done that without seeing what Dalton did first. Like I said, Dalton kind of broke the ice for Pierce to try and have more of the inner man shown on the screen, like with Elektra, or like you mentioned, Terry Hatcher's character, showing that the regret, which then made it easy for Barbara Broccoli's favorite to come in and do whatever he wanted.
Well, another thing about Brosnan is I think he channeled his inner widower in that scene. Like, he's very impactful in that scene with Terry Hatcher. I mean, we all know that Brosnan had lost a wife before, in very sad circumstances. I wonder, did he channel that grief he'd suffered? Because he does very little, but the pain is there. I think that scene where he finds the body and then shoots Dr. Guffman, I think that's his finest. That's his finest achievement as Bond. I think that was the Bond he wanted to. That vulnerability, the suaveness, and the emotional coiled anger. I think that was I think we get it all there in that 3-minute scene.
Yeah, I love that scene, but it never occurred to me that he might be channeling his own experience there. I think that's a good point.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to have to rewatch that and look at it from that perspective. We're going to put a pin in this conversation right now, gentlemen. We've been talking for a little over 30 minutes, but I definitely want to get back to this topic because there's a few more items I want to touch on the legacy of this film. Is there anything, Owen, you'd like to promote before we sign off?
I've got a couple of music articles. I've just my interview with Justin Hayward of the Moody Blues has gone on. I don't know if there's a connection between the Moody Blues and Bond, but if there is, let's go with it.
All right. Bill, how about you?
In the next installment, I had earlier mentioned that unusual Nickelodeon special about License to Kill. There is one anecdote related to that I'd like to touch on in the next installment.
Yeah, definitely. And of course, we can find all your writings and musings at the Spy Command.
Yes.
So please look there for more of Bill. And David, where can people find you?
I'm sure that many people who are listening know that I am at jamesbondossier.com, and I'm also the author of the Complete Guide to the Tricks of James Bond.
And I also can be found as a contributor to the jamesbondossier.com doing comic book reviews. So thank you for listening, and we will see you on the next installment of License to Legacy.